Okay, so we have a tough topic, employee engagement. It's been sinking, and we want to do more than just move around the deck chairs on the Titanic. So we'll get to some advice later, but I want to start with the question that's right in the title of this session, which is like, why isn't this HR's job? And I want you to convince me that this is the COO's concern. Carol.
All right, well, I will start. Generally, COOs have a large majority of the employees in the company. And communication and culture is core to any job that you have, but building that trust with your employees is part of the job. And how you do that and your tactics that you use to listen and act and respond is part of how you can drive that change agenda, which is so important for the company.
Great. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I also think it's not only the COO's job, I think it's all of the leadership. It's not HR's job to put programs in place and then expect that that's gonna give you an uplift in engagement. I think it's about how the leaders show up, and as Carol mentioned, the COO typically has a very large remit and a large employee population that can have a lot of impact and have a lot of say in how the company is set up and how it's operating. So for me, it's not only because I'm a COO, it's because I'm a leader in the company, and how I show up, how my colleagues show up from the get-go is super, super important. And so I think, at Scopely, we really believe in that. It's a topic that we're always discussing at the leadership team, which is something I think is phenomenal.
Right.
I haven't always seen that.
And I think it's interesting too, now that I listen to you, it's like employees are often watching their leaders and thinking, do they really know what they're doing? Like, are we on a good path here? And so if their motivation in their career is to be a very successful company,
yes,
that's part of your job too. Okay, so why, I think we all have different answers for this, but why is employee engagement so low? Like, it just hit a new low in April.
We actually have a bit of a good news story. So for those of you that I know, so maybe we'll share like how you can help manage it and improve on it. One of the things that I hit on in my opening comments were around listening. And I know we think, and I was probably a leader like this, that we are listening to our employees. And that is really important. But there's a difference in terms of listening to actually act and respond and make decisions. And a decision could even be, I'm sorry, we can't do that, but I've heard you. So this idea of listening with intent. And then one of the things we learned through the pandemic, as we were really pulsing and listening to employees around what was happening with them, how they were adapting to remote work, all the things that we were doing, was that they wanted to stay in an environment where they had flexibility and choice. And that was a big decision for us as a company, and we leaned into flexibility and choice. But with that, we had to create the opportunity to make sure we were staying close to our employees and pulsing them. And where we really found how this would work for us, and so I obviously run tech and operations, so I have a background in tech and product development. If you think about how we listen to customers, and you think about agile development in that life cycle of continuous improvement, the biggest thing in that is customer feedback. And so as a company, how do you treat your employees like customers, take their feedback, work them into the processes you have to work similarly to how you work with your customers? It sounds so easy, but many companies are not set up this way. That's not how we take feedback. We get feedback, we create a couple initiatives and you move on. You have to have this continuous feedback loop. And with that, the communication of that back to employees. So as the COO, I get out to all my hubs every year globally. And out of that meeting, there is a ton of things we learn, but we respond to the feedback and say, hey, here's what we're gonna take back, and here's what we need to table for these reasons. That goes so far because, oh my gosh, they heard me, they understood, and they know that we can't work on that right now, and that we'll come back to that at another point. Yeah. It sounds so simple, but if you're not doing that, your employers are gonna say, wait a minute, they come out, they write everything down, and they never hear again.
Right, create cynicism for sure. And well, I wanna come back to some of the things you hear in those listening circles or tours. But Eunice, what have you found also as a drag on engagement?
I think coming out of the pandemic, a lot of people's habits changed, and I think that has a huge impact on engagement and how connected you are to where you work. And I think for being fully remote or some version of that for a lot of companies, and even hybrid, and people's comfort of, our CEO always says, do I like working from home? Is it easier? Yes. But there's something also missing, and I think it's been hard for employees and individuals to understand what those trade-offs are, and sometimes there's a lot of emphasis in the conversation about flexibility and being at home or being able to do things by working remotely, but there's also that missing piece of human connection, and I think this is my own, having read a lot of articles as well and my own kind of what I see out there, but I definitely think that there's something about that lessened human interaction and connection that does drive engagement down, but I don't know that individuals can always articulate it that way.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with Carol too. It's all about listening and doing something about what you've heard. It's not enough to have the listening circles, but be active in terms of what you're going to do about it. We're very committed about talking about what we see in our survey and then trying to link back, like here's the actions we're taking. And we've seen an increase in a number of areas that we were focused on, so that's been positive to see.
Right. I love what you said about remote work, because I think it's true that people are working at home and they feel like maybe they start to feel flat and they don't know why. Yeah. And it's because they don't know that it's like that they need to be with people, but they need to be seen in order to feel motivated to keep going. You know, like that's been proven.
Right, because I think there's that link of like, all the studies are saying that loneliness is at an all-time high. Yeah. I can't help but believe that there's a connection there too with like how you feel engaged at work if you're feeling lonely.
Right.
Well, I do think on flexibility, offering that to employees is important.
Yes.
But it is a two-way street. We are flexible to understand the needs you have, but there's flexibility around, hey, we're going to do purposeful gatherings.
Yes.
You need to come in for these types of things on a periodic basis, because the way we talk about it in Synchrony is our culture is very special to us, and it is built by all of us. So the ability to continue to improve and evolve that, especially as you have folks joining the company new, is an obligation we all have. And so that purposeful gathering and setting those expectations is really important.
Right, a little stress. Stress is the spice of life, right? You need a little bit of the productive pressure. In a few minutes, I'll be coming to the audience to solicit questions, so please be thinking about what you'd like to talk about. But let's go back to some of what you've heard from your employees when you go and you do these surveys and then you take it, and you actually put something into action. What have you learned?
So I'll start. So I think when you really do listen, and I'm not trying to be too much pontificating here, you always want to hear, it's just like with your children, you want them to tell you the things that are probably the hardest. Same thing with your employees, building that trust so that they will tell you the things that are hard. We prided ourselves on having very robust tuition reimbursement, as well as skills programs. So if you think about upskilling, reskilling, many of the things that are on all of our minds, robust programs. And I was really struggling with, like, why aren't we seeing enough adoption of this? And I was thinking, is this a self-starter issue? Is this a management issue? Is this an employee issue? So I started just listening for signals from employees. And finally, one employee, and then it sort of became a few others, had the courage to say, well, the problem is, Carol, it's a friction point. I want to do this, but the way tuition reimbursement or a skills class, if I want to get this AWS certification, is I have to wait till I'm done to get paid. And that's a barrier because I might not be able to make my car payment if I float that class. I was like, whoa, okay, that's fixable. Like that, okay, so we went back and we said, what can we do to allow, and there are companies that do this, you work with through your HR teams, to actually pay for those at the get-go so someone can go in and do the work. You can build the fraud detection in it, you can do all the things. But again, the uptick from an employee perspective, and that was something, it didn't even occur to me. Like we're so far removed from certain things that an employee having the courage to say, I want to do this, but I'm not sure I can afford it, is a humbling thing for an employee to say. But for us to take action was really, that was like the, those were the high fives around the rooms, because that was solved in a couple weeks. Some of the things take a little more time.
Right, that's a great example, yeah.
100%, yeah, very interesting. I'm going to take that away. I think for us, just to give a little context on Scopely, we're not that far from being a startup. So, we've scaled rapidly. We're still a relatively small, mid-sized company.
Are you best known for your Monopoly game?
Yes, Monopoly Go. I'm sure some folks here have touched it. 40% of the U.S. Has played one of Scopely's games.
Oh, wow.
May not know it, but has definitely done that. But so I think for us, in some ways, we're still managing a decent-sized scale that makes us able to do certain things that maybe larger companies can't do at this time. But I think one of the things that we've found challenging is a few years ago, we really invested in building up our Spain presence and in Barcelona. Of course, we were sort of ahead of the game. This was before the pandemic and before it became like this total hotspot for folks to relocate to, whether you're from the US or in Europe. But I think one of the challenges we've felt is that those employees, through listening, through feedback surveys, every time I travel to any of our offices, I also sit down with a group of employees and have a session with them, and so do the rest of our C-suite. Is just that Spain hub, it's our bigger employee population, actually. It's our biggest employee population, but they always feel second class. Even if you're providing the best services and experience for them, they just feel like it's a US-centric company. And I have worked in Europe for a US headquarter company. I lived in London for 6 years and worked across all of our European offices, and I know what that feels like. And there's no intention on the part of the HQ or your US colleagues to make you feel that way, but a lot of our executives are in the US, so a lot of our time zones and our meetings are, done around that. And so just hearing that in the last couple years, we added one of our executive team members is based, we have actually 2 based in Europe now, and I think that that's made a huge difference in terms of them feeling, employees feeling like they have somebody who's senior and an advocate for them. Also recently, my leadership team read Culture Map by Erin Meyer. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. And even though I've done cross-cultural training before, it was just such a good reminder of how much gets, I think, misinterpreted and miscommunicated due to cultural misunderstandings and operating in different time zones. And when you expand to truly having a global footprint, how much of that comes into play in your everyday? So Erin Meyer is actually doing a session with our DEI leader, a Q&A session for the entire company. And I've asked the executive team, let's do this as a book club reading, because we really need to be reminded of this.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a little familiar with her work. Yeah, it's really smart.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the audience today? And if you raise your hand, somebody will bring a mic to you. About audience engagement? No. Okay. So, okay. Yes.
A question about surveys. So we're all surveying our people a lot, and we get a ton of data. How do you, from that signal to noise, how do you make sense of it? We all fill out surveys all the time as consumers, and usually we fill out more when we're angry or something's gone wrong. So a little bit about that. How do you make sense of them? How do you use them?
Great question.
So I'll start. So we've been a public company for 10 years, and when we were on that journey, we made the decision to partner with Fortune and Great Places to Work early in that to begin the Great Places to Work survey. And for those of you that don't know it, it really is a survey that is about measuring trust. Trust between the employee and their direct manager, and employee and the leadership team. And obviously the series of questions at the heart of it is trying to help you understand where they are in that journey and then what you need to do to support them. And then at the end, there's 2 questions that I always love. It's, what makes your company, what makes Synchrony a great place to work, and what would make it an even better place to work? And so that data is awesome because you can slice and dice by generation. So in that, we found things relative to Gen Z and the need for, we heard some things in there around sort of overwhelmed feelings, mental wellness. So we then, kind of pulled the page out of the book and did a series of roundtables. And we heard that the thing we worry the most about, it's not compensation, it's not promotion, it's just overwhelming mental wellness and stress. And so we then decided we were going to bring an on-site therapist that we now have on-site in our headquarters, in addition to all of the remote coaches we have to help our employees. So I think you have to, I always say, if you're going to do a survey, you have to be willing to hear the things that are hard. One of the things we did this year that was really great, to kind of segue into, we used some AI to actually, because I have a very large employee population, so my total comments were upwards of 30,000.
I was going to make the same point.
Yeah. So we, I generally have my, my spreadsheet madness that I run over a couple weekends, but then I use some AI to help categorize, to connect things that I might not have seen to kind of draw these conclusions. And again, that then becomes what, my roadshow around, here's what you all told me, and here's what we're doing about it. I know surveys can be like, oh my gosh, we've got another survey. But at the end of the day, that's your mechanism for really understanding. And the biggest thing about Great Places to Work surveys is it doesn't matter where you land, you just have to start somewhere. But It's getting that feedback and getting the participation, because if your participation rate is high, it means you have an engaged population. They're willing to give you the feedback. This year we landed number 5 on the Great Places to Work in the U.S., which we are extremely proud of. So
Congrats.
That is very hard to do, having done that.
So Eunice, what prompts, you said you do the same thing, what prompts do you give the AI to dig into that survey data?
Well, I mean, I'm probably not like Carol, haven't done it directly in my own spreadsheets, but I think it's actually trying to drive for insights in the themes. Like, it's something that somebody can do by like manually reading the comments, and some of the tools nowadays give you some like summarized views of it, but I think it's actually trying to see like how many counts of the same things you're looking at, what populations it's coming from, because it's not all is equal. Again, like we'll have differences in our Spanish versus our Bangalore-based employees, and so being able to really get to some insights versus just data, because it's very overwhelming, I think is really important, and we talk a lot about that, not only in our business KPIs, but also in our employee engagement KPIs. I would say participation is super important. We're really proud of the fact that we are like at 98% survey participation. It's like pretty insane from my perspective. I haven't seen that before. So, but also you have to know when your employees are at survey fatigue. So, my grand plan had been a couple years ago, we're gonna do these like pulse quarterly surveys, but actually our employees were telling us, we're good. Like maybe just one a year that's like the right amount is good for now. And we might change that depending on when we might want to know about something, an initiative has worked or not. So listening is super important and reacting. So I think.
What are your employees saying about AI? Because we've seen AI be something that motivates people to go on strike a couple of times now. So is it something that you can use as a tool for engagement beyond the surveys?
I think so, for sure. I think for me, first and foremost, it's about demystifying it and kind of being less fearful of it, and that's brought to life by use cases. We talk about it from like, how does an admin use it to great effect to make them feel more productive and efficient, to all the way through to like kind of the bigger business use cases. But part of it is that demystification. So for example, I think people teams or any of the other ops functions may not typically see themselves as like the use case for AI, but thinking about how they might use it and make their jobs easier. So, there is a human component of looking at your survey data, whatever data it might be, data sets it might be, but how might AI help you do it faster and actually get to the really insightful things that are gonna help change and drive impact? We've talked a lot about that. We're about to launch a number of workshops where you're going through use cases. So our CTO co-founder already led a session himself personally, because he's leading the AI efforts in our company, with the finance team and the finance business partners, and just went through how you might use ChatGPT. We have the enterprise version of it, how you might use it to make you more effective, and we're about to do the same thing for the people function, et cetera, et cetera.
So how to make it so that you do the things you love in your job a little more.
Yes, and you're better at it in some ways.
Right. So what is your one piece of advice, just to go back? Oh, sorry, Carol, if you want to answer about AI, we can do that. Yeah, go ahead. It's like the debates.
I completely agree with Eunice, and so much of the commentary today is about humans in the loop. It's not, and you need to demystify it and make it less fearful for employees. So one of the things we did last year is we have a culture of running hackathons on a regular basis around how we come up with new ideas. Our generative AI hackathon was the most oversubscribed hackathon. We invited anybody across the company to participate. So that opened it up for those that were willing and able to just get an understanding and work through that. And generally, for anyone that's run a hackathon, you usually on anything get maybe 5 or 6 ideas and then many offshoots of that. We got almost 30 unique ideas. So when you think about how opportunistic this can be for any business, when you actually let people be creative with it and not fear it, and that helped create the pipeline for the use cases that we were testing over the last year to really solidify the AI strategy.
Great, okay. So I'm going to ask you each for one tip about how you would improve employee engagement. And what you said about a therapist bringing in the office, my tip is bring in some horses. We learned yesterday that horses can teach you a lot. What is your number one piece of advice? Eunice.
I don't want to steal your thunder.
That's okay.
But I do think it's about listening and doing something with it. Like, you can say, oh, these are the themes from whatever feedback we've had, and then go silent on it, which is very common. But I think It's about showing employees and engaging on a human-to-human level, I think is super, super duper important. And your executives have to show up. If they're not living it, it's gonna fall flat.
Yeah. I think it's listening, but my 3 magic words that I share often when someone's talking and you're not sure if you can get it out of them, you just say 3 words, just tell me more. And then people will just start talking. And I think that shows a level of empathy and ability to want to hear what's on their minds, and they can speak more openly versus answering a targeted question. And you get a lot that way. It also works on my kids. So.
Great. So many good ideas.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.